first diversity lecture of 2022 and of the semester. I hope that your semester is going well and that you are ready to engage again, not just with the diversity committee, but also in the diversity lecture series. Today we have a special group that is joining us. This particular research was funded by the Dean of the College of Education and Human Ecology in his GSIRI grant. And this is one of the products that has come out. There will be two in the diversity series this year, but this team represents the very first of the GSIRI group that is coming before you, and also one of 4 graduate student-led presentations. So we're really excited to have Dr. Lauri Katz as the PI for the GSIRI's team, and Gretchen Turner, who is going to be presenting on behalf of the team, the graduate students that were engaged in the team. The title of their talk is documenting the intersection of first-gen students with disabilities. So we're very excited to have you, Lauri and Gretchen. And with that, I will be quiet. I did want to tell the audience, though, if you have a question and you would like to engage in the conversation, please use your hand raise feature in Zoom and/or throw it in the chat. I will be monitoring the chat so that Lauri and Gretchen can stay focused on their presentation. And then at a point that it's convenient, I'll either interject, or you can save your question to the end of the presentation, where they will allow a few minutes for us to have discussion before we close at 1 o'clock. So again, Lauri and Gretchen, welcome, and thank you so much for your time and for engaging us in this important topic and conversation. So we are ready to get started.
Thanks. And Dr. Katz, would you like to introduce yourself first before we get started?
Sure. Dr. Lauri Katz, and I'm professor in Department of Teaching and Learning. And it's good to see people, I guess mostly from Ed Studies that I'm familiar with, and Colette and Belinda, and looking forward to see many others. And of course, I know Karen already. So yeah, it's been great to be part of this collaboration.
Thanks. Okay, so hi, my name is Gretchen Turner. I'm an doctoral student in higher education and student affairs, which is part of educational studies. I am an EDD student, so Doctor of Education student, and I will let you know that EDD students are, we are interested in doing research. We sometimes find it difficult to wrangle that into with our schedules, as a lot of us, as a lot of PhD students are too, are managing families and jobs and life in a pandemic. And we'll talk a little bit about that and how that has evolved with our collaboration. And it's such a pleasure to be invited today. I really appreciate being involved. And it's challenging for me to know that we have this work that has been done through a real collaborative effort from different individuals, who not all of whom could be here today. So if you could advance to the next slide, we'll give you a taste of our group. So there's Paul Gregor, who's a PhD student, Tyler Hallmark, who is a PhD from last year, Ishtiaq Ahmed, who is PhD from 2020, myself, and Dr. Katz. And so here is a picture of us when we started in 2019. You'll notice there are no masks. We are in person, and we look so fresh-faced. This is, I have really good memories of getting to know these guys. And it was actually, I think, Paul's original idea. And then we were all, there was a call for proposals, and we all came together. And we have really been through a journey with the GSIRI folks. I think we were in the first round of funding, and it's hard to believe that here we are in 2022, 2 years later. Tyler Hallmark, Dr. Hallmark, has graduated, is now with the Sloan Foundation. Dr. Ahmed has graduated and has moved to his home country and as a professor. I will be graduating in spring of this year, as far as I know. And we are all, there's been so much change with our group. People have taken jobs or left jobs, they've graduated, they've had children. We've had preschoolers and folks start kindergarten, and it's been a real treasure to be able to return to this research as we're doing it. And then also noticing that this is all happening in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. And And interestingly, we did most of our interviews, actually all of our interviews over Zoom, and those interviews were taking place just at the same time as the murder of George Floyd and a lot of the demonstrations and things that were going on. So it's hard to remove our research and the context of the findings from that very specific moment in time that we still find ourselves in, frankly. So
yes, and I just wanted to add, I think one of the reasons I came in on the group, I was asked, was Ishtiaq Ahmed was one of my doctoral advisees at the time. And I think the group was looking for somebody, you know, a mentor, because they needed a faculty mentor. And I was asked to be part of this. And I said, sure, that would be fine. My background, some of my background is in disabilities, especially inclusive education. So this was not, quote, a project. The topic was something that I knew something about. And plus I was going to learn more in the college context. I tend to focus, as some of you may know, more in the preschool through 9 years of age and then worked up to 12th grade. But yes, I'm learning more about the college environment. And I try to use my role very much in terms of supporting what the group was going to do. I wanted to make sure I wasn't telling them how to do this. I never made decisions by myself. I tried to be involved in their thinking, in their meetings. And I was very cognizant of, well, do you want me there? Do you need me there? How do you want to do this? So I was very sensitive to this, but I worked well with everybody, and it was just a really good, I think, collaboration. And it's interesting that Gretchen is getting her EDD because our department, as many of you may know, is trying to develop, we're in the process right now of developing an EDD program. So Gretchen is a great example of, you know, kind of the capabilities and wherewithal that we have here. The other thing that I really liked about this project is I think it's really critical that doctoral students not just do a dissertation. First of all, you cannot be competitive out in the field with just a dissertation. That's right. Often we find that people who are applying for positions have done at least another research project where they have done presentations, publications, right, whatever. And this is really, I know our department, our own department is, we had developed like a research apprenticeship, you know, for this very reason. And so I think this is a really good, even though everybody was extremely busy with their own kind of doctoral dissertations and projects and jobs and families, this is still very important part of the doctoral program.
I agree. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. And I should mention too that as a group that most or all of the group do identify as either being students with disabilities or first generation students, so that we're coming to this with our identities at play, also as researchers, but also as students with disabilities and students who come from first generation, or as I like to say for myself, first gen adjacent backgrounds. I wanted to share this real quickly. Another venue that we've shared this research with the GSIRI funding is with a poster session from, I believe this is a year and a half or so ago, that if anyone would like a copy of this, and this is more of a, to see the the research in a
was this
scale.
from the EHE research forum?
That's right, yes.
Yeah, right. We did too.
I thought I would
Great.
share it as another product that has come forward. The next slide, please. Okay, so we'll get into a little bit of background on our study. So we have a qualitative study informed by narrative analysis, which is an attempt to understand the experiences of first-generation students with disabilities in higher education. And of course, we give great thanks to the GSIRI funding and to the Dean's Office for being a part of this. We have a background and rationale, and there's actually quite a bit of research in the literature about for students with disabilities attending college in growing numbers. And there's research locally and nationally on first-generation students who are attending college in greater numbers, but there is less research, especially localized research, in first-generation students with disabilities. So the intersection of both of those identities is sort of a cumulative factor. And we do know that people who graduate with a degree from a higher education institution earn more in a lifetime than those with some college. And we know that students who receive accommodations are more likely to graduate. So of interest is we know some things about first generation students that they may be less likely to seek out help. And then if you're a first generation student with a disability, does that make you less likely to seek out accommodations, for example? These are the sorts of questions that we had going as we were approaching this research.
Yes, and as you know, it's really important as we start analyzing data to really understand what the research is saying, how is the study furthering the research, you know, where are we going with it?
So real quickly to put sort of a baseline on what we were looking to accomplish with this research, our objectives to understand the lives of first generation students with disabilities in higher education, to document the barriers that these students have experienced during their transition to college and during their academic studies. We want to gain knowledge of the lived experience of students who identify as both first generation and students with disabilities. And through this, how they're telling their stories. And so we have two research questions that are guiding this research. One, how do first generation students with disabilities navigate college culture? And two, in what ways could Ohio State and other institutions provide resources to ensure access and retention of these students? And that's a tall order, and hopefully we've made a little bit of a contribution, a dent to knowing more about those topics.
Some of the frameworks and theories that we used was, and I'll go from the bottom first, is the concept, the theory around intersectionality. As many of you may know, that this refers to two or more identities, either of an individual or a group of individuals, and that they may overlap to create a distinct experience for those holding the identity. So in this case, we were obviously looking at first generation, disability, and probably we were looking at some class issues also from socioeconomic backgrounds. And this idea of intersectionality has originated from, I think, Crenshaw in 1991 from her Black feminist theory, who first wrote about the concept in order to explain the oppression which African-American women face due to holding two marginalized identities. And then we find that examining disadvantage in a single context does not provide an adequate picture of the interconnectedness of systems of oppression. The intersectionality has historically been used with Crenshaw, who used race, class, and gender. However, disability has been utilized to an increasing extent with various convergence to define intersectionality in the context of, quote, the modern college student. You know, as you know, we're not the only university that is welcoming, providing services to first gen. This has really, I think, been a theme across the country. In terms of disabilities and how we thought about disabilities was really more from, I'd say, university definitions that really is using the federal guidelines. And I went online to see what Disability Services was saying. And they talk about providing accommodations to eliminate disability-related barriers in the environment and curriculum so that the student has an equal opportunity for success. And this very much relates into the disability studies theories, where structure causes a person to be, the curriculum and the environment causes the person to be disabled. The disability does not lie within the individual. We used first generation, and this was actually somewhat new for me. I always thought that, well, the definition that we used was a student whose parent did not complete a four-year college or a university degree. And originally I had thought about first generation, you know, they didn't even think about going to college or didn't even try. So I thought it was really interesting to, and this played into the interviews of parents who maybe started and didn't finish. So these were indeed, you know, the people who were just first finishing, you know, getting a degree in college. And that also feeds into some of the barriers just in terms of completing a degree. So I think that was the four that we thought about right now. Did you want me to go with this, or do you want to start with this, Gretchen?
I can cover this, and then if you want to jump in, Dr. Katz, with any comments that you have.
Sure.
So a little bit about our methodology and our recruitment approach. So we had a short survey to capture eligibility during our recruitment. That was, I believe, a Qualtrics survey where students would go and indicate that they were first generation, self-identify as students with disabilities. And we did provide incentives for students to participate. We used $50 gift cards with the funding.
I switched to the next slide because I love the recruitments, the flyer.
Sure. So each student, when they signed up to participate, agreed to participate in 3 interviews of about 45 minutes each. And these were semi-structured interviews with the idea and following the approach of, sorry, the name has escaped me. It's Seidman. Following Seidman's recommendation, and it's more of establishing a relationship with the student to get those in-depth, really rich description of student experience. So each student had 3 approximately 45-minute interviews. Those were audio recorded, actually recorded on Zoom, a small benefit of being in a pandemic at the time. And we did work with the Office of Student Life Office of Disability Services to advertise our study in their e-newsletter. And then we had physical signs on campus as well, if you can imagine that. So, and we did have a good response to our recruitment. If we're gonna go to the next slide.
You may have mentioned this, Gretchen, but just for my clarification, as you were speaking, I think I might have not caught. When you through your first net, you know, cast it wide, where did you, or how did you begin to access people to just go through the check to see if they were eligible? Were they OSU students only? Were they students that were registered with the Office of Disability Services? How did you find your initial set?
Sure, thanks for the question. So these are students that were registered with the Office of Disability Services. The ones who got the recruitment flyer in the e-newsletter that would have gone to students who registered with Student Life Disability Services. These, the other poster that was shared in university buildings was open to any. I think we did end up having all of the students that we interviewed were associated or were receiving services from Student Life Disability Services at some point in time.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's what I wanted to know.
But I don't think it was just disability services that we recruited through. I think, as you were saying, you all had some really good emails and organizations that you were sending.
I do believe it also went through the First Gen Student Organization and through some other listservs and student group email groups, as I remember. But at first we were concerned that we would not get enough respondents, and then settled on a good manageable number at the outset. I think it was an interesting time to be doing recruitment because it was all happening via email. Right. And it was not like being able to go into classes, right, and make announcements.
So Amanda Donahue has a follow-up. She said, how did you determine which students received the survey? What was the breakdown of students who participated in SLDS versus the not registered students?
Okay. If we go forward another slide, I think we will, I think we'll touch on all
of those. Okay,
yeah,
thank you.
As we look more about,
she said she thinks that it's already answered. Okay.
Okay, great. If you have follow-up questions, just drop them in the chat. No worries.
Yeah.
So I'll speak a little bit briefly on the demographics, the population that we reached through the through this study.
Let me back up for a second, Gretchen, and talk a little bit about the 3 interviews, because this is something that I suggested. I actually know Irv Seidman when I was doing my own doctorate at University of Massachusetts, where he was. And he created kind of phenomenology interviewing, which involves conducting 3 separate interviews with each participant. And he really felt this was important because it led to the emphasis on exploring the meaning of people's experiences in the context of their lives. In this case, we were looking at their academic journeys in post-secondary education. And the 3 interviews were really, I think, really allowed both the interviewer and the participant to explore the participant's experience, their place in context, and reflect in its meaning. And Ishtiaq, who was on the team, used this methodology in his dissertation. So he was familiar with it and really saw it was important. And then the rest of the team read up on it. And I talked to them a little about it, and then they decided to adopt it in this. So I think this was because this was really the main data source that the group used in the in this. So I just wanted to highlight that there. So go ahead now on the demographics in the population.
Sure, and thank you for that. And I'll mention that that was another benefit of having the group that we had put together of people on the research team. We had some PhD students that were further along in their program, were post-candidacy, or were actually finished with their dissertation, where Paul and I were just starting out. So there was a lot of peer mentoring and learning from each other. So, so as a result of our recruitment initiatives, we came back with a total of 11 students who went through the interview process. They were all degree-seeking students who were enrolled at Ohio State at the time of participation. We had a split of 4 graduate students and 7 undergraduate students. 7 identifying as male, 3 identifying as female, and 1 person identifying as non-binary. And we did have representation from across the LGBTQ spectrum. The academic rank ranged from a first-year freshman all the way up to PhD students. And we had a very wide range of students. So this sort of goes against the traditional thought of college-age students being in that 18 to 24 age bracket. We had students all the way up to the, I don't even know if we call them non-traditional students anymore. Now they're just students. And we did have a diversity of ethnicity, white, African-American, Latino, and South Asian, and different kinds of disabilities were represented, both mental health, behavioral health, and physical disabilities. And so referring to all of our respondents through their pseudonyms to protect their privacy, we ended up with this pool of 11 students. And if I could speak briefly on the different sorts of disabilities that these students disclosed to the researchers. And some students had more than one disability. And I think it's important to note that the impact of the student's disability on their daily life may have varied from student to student. So we had students with visual impairment, some from infancy, learning differences, dyslexia, ADHD, depression, anxiety, PTSD, that's post-traumatic stress disorder, folks on the autism spectrum, and those with physical and mobility impairments. And Dr. Katz, if you'd like to say a little bit about how we structured the interview questions.
Yeah, Gretchen had talked about this we started this maybe when COVID was just striking in Ohio. And we felt that really one of the first questions, even though it wasn't part of our research, but it was really a way of developing a relationship, because as you know, in qualitative research, the type of relationship that you have with your participant, the more apt they are able to share information. And we really wanted to hear their stories, capture their stories, through their academic journeys. So what's not even on here is, one of the first things was, how are you dealing with the COVID? What is happening right now? And that was, and that really kind of helped break the ice. And then we asked questions. Obviously, we had questions out there, but we let the questions kind of, we wanted to make it more of a conversational type of thing. Initial impressions at the beginning of their program will tell us, what, think back, what happened when you first went to your program. And we didn't, even if they were graduate students, there was always conversation about families, growing up, and undergraduate experiences as well. So it wasn't like we were just starting with if you were an undergraduate student, just starting with your undergraduate or just starting with your graduate program. It really was kind of these life stories that were selective in terms of understanding, getting at our research questions that you have. So I'm not going to read them here, but you can see. And then what we did is we did coding, but even before the coding, after, we transcribed. Fortunately, the group had money to do transcriptions, though today now with Zoom, it's all transcribed. But so we got the transcriptions really quickly. What I suggested, and I think, and Irv Seidman does this too, is the idea of writing profiles. So we all kind of had students, like Gretchen, you did how many students?
I think for the profiles, it was 2.
Right, you did 2, and then you interviewed 2 students?
Mm-hmm.
2, or yeah. So one person would do all 3 interviews, which was really critical, because then we wouldn't have to pass on information. Obviously, and I took on 2, I did one interview because I wanted to see how it go, what was going on. And so after we did the interviews, then we each wrote up profiles, and writing up the profile really helped all of us kind of think about the person as a whole in terms of their journeys. And then what we did is we did coding. And I ended up using Atlas TI for the coding, because I really, I've used different types of software coding, but I wanted to make sure I really learned Atlas so I would get familiar with it. Some of the group, I'm not sure how, I think some of the groups started with Atlas because as doctoral students or graduate students, you could download it free. I actually think faculty can download it free for a while. But I actually bought the program. So we all did coding, and we all did coding with our interviews, and then we would check each other's, and to make sure they were all under the particular code. So we would check our own. So some of them were first the initial perceptions at the beginning of their program, how those initial perceptions changed over time. What barriers, challenges did they experience in their academic journey? Who supported them, and what were they getting the supports on? And also, we wanted to know their relationship with disability services. We're not saying good or bad. We were looking for kind of, when did you go to disability services, to seek the help? How did you learn about it? What kinds of accommodations did they receive from this? What was really important too, we felt, is when they first discovered they had a disability, and if that diagnosis or diagnoses changed over time. What services, organizations did they access being a first-gen student? I know that the group was really interested in, did they get to, I think it's Buckeye, what's it called? Buckeye First or something, or the new programs that the university had started. And also interactions that they experience with their professors, instructors, advisors. And this was separate from disability services. And then what suggestions did students give for improving the conditions and experiences with disabilities and/or first generation students? So this is where we came for our, we did the coding for all the 11 interviews, and quite honestly, Atlas did a real nice job. It was easy. You just kind of, copy the quotes and then you just put it in, and then and then I was able to send a lot of this out to everybody. So we all had the same information. Do you want to go with this slide?
Sure.
And then as I was saying, we were going through a lot of quotes, and for this presentation, we wanted to take a quote that really led to our findings, our emerging findings.
Sure. So this quote is from Kirk, who said, "I definitely think my first gen identity definitely contributed to this idea of I can't admit that I need help from my professors, and I can't approach them or advocate for myself because I didn't know that I deserved to be there or in their class, or I felt a little out of place. There's no way I'm going to do this well."
Yeah, and this kind of attitude, I think, really prevailed with many of the participants. It was the idea, and this kind of went into the challenges that the students encountered in their academic journey. A lot of them just felt they didn't fit in. They were in dorms or interacting with people from two-parent families. Their families had already gone to college. They talked about overhearing conversations that their friends had with their parents, and their parents asking them, did you do this? Did you do that? Did you do early scheduling? And this also came in with the challenge of not really having the local knowledge of the university or universities in general.
Yeah, that is so important, Lauri, and I really appreciate you bringing that out, especially as you started to detail this, Gretchen. That's one of the reasons we enjoy doing this series, actually, because as faculty, we really don't know what the students are experiencing until somebody asks them. And because many times, many students feel like they can't speak up or they're afraid to come to a faculty member. So this perspective is so very valuable for that reason. And one of the best takeaways I think that we've had just doing the diversity series generally is making faculty much more aware of what the student experience is. So I really appreciate that one in particular. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I was surprised myself because they were saying things like, we didn't think we deserved to be here. And then that also came in, we didn't think we deserved to be here. And so we didn't take advantage of any services. Or they were also thinking that they didn't think that disability services would help them. Another issue that we had was, they obviously had financial issues. Even if they had money, they were given money to go to, for tuition. Many of them were working, and then obviously with COVID, things they weren't working anymore, or their hours were a lot shorter. You had some people living in dorms during COVID and others who were commuters, so they were having a lot of transportation issues. And I think what's interesting is about the disability. Some people came in, whether it was at Ohio State or even if they were a doctoral student here, they would talk about their previous undergrad experience, and many of them wanted to fit in. And what fitting in meant is that I'm not going to be different. If I say that I need help from disability services, that means that I'm going to be different. And they wanted to, even though they were diagnosed earlier with some type of disability, they really want this whole kind of fitting in, mixing was really important. And then what happens is that there's something that occurs in their life, whether it's an accident, a car accident, whether it's they're starting to get behind in courses. They are getting a bad grade on a big test. They're breaking up with their boyfriend. And then they start really, they start panicking. I don't want to say panic, but they start self-medicating. They start, they're not getting help yet, but they are self-medicating. They're experiencing a lot of, issues, thinking, hey, I may not be able to graduate. And that's where often they started getting help. So they would have maybe a boyfriend or a partner would say, maybe you should go to a counselor or, some help. So that's when they started. And quite honestly, the pass fail that the university did saved a lot of these folks. This pass fail, that they could change their grades. That was really kind of like life-saving. So, these people can get through. We have here not having family to talk about college, but I do want to be careful here. And I think the parents did play a supportive role by encouraging them to go to college. And that we heard from most of everybody. They were saying, even somebody who had a parent in prison, that parent was very proud that their child was in college. And parents would say, if you don't go now, right after high school, you may not go, because that's probably what that parent did. They knew, they started and they just didn't finish. And often the parents they weren't able to fill out forms because if they didn't go to college, they don't know what a FAFSA form, a financial aid form looks like. But they did find friends, friends to help, family friends. And even though those parents may not have had the money to help, there was other people in the family that helped. So I think the parents, did play an important role here.
Okay, I just want to draw our attention to the time. We've got 15 minutes left on the hour, so let's just hold conversation until you finish the presentation, and then we'll re-engage. I want to make sure that you can complete.
Yeah, well, and I think with some of the emerging themes, there were differences in the experience between the undergrad and the graduate students. I think if the graduate students, all of them went to disability services, because many of them as an undergrad felt, hey, I'm going to try this out, see if I can do it myself. And they realized they couldn't do it by themselves. They needed the support of disability services. I don't think we get the sense that the grad students really didn't take advantage of the first gen program, because they said, I've already been through an undergrad program. I have an undergrad degree. And then also we heard them saying, I don't have time for this, and they're too young. I mean, the undergrads were too young because the graduates were older. Now, I think that's different with the disability services, because I think one of the participants actually was involved in starting a disability program. And they didn't feel comfortable advocating for themselves. And some of the other things that I started to share, and I think the last thing, the accommodations were really vital to their college success.
Yeah, Dr. Katz, if I could, I think I had One thought on the graduate student question is my initial thought was, well, the graduate students are just older, so that's a maturation effect, and they've just gotten more time to be comfortable with themselves and their identity. And I don't know if we have enough data to know if that's specifically it. I think there is some experience that's gained through the graduate experience, and the demands that are placed on students are very different for undergrad students than they are for graduate students. And the type of accommodations that undergraduates and graduate students take advantage of or have access to are sometimes different, you know, where it's more extended time for a paper versus having recorded lectures or something like that. But the importance of the accommodations, as you said, could not be understated. So in the interest of time, I think we'll move forward to our conclusions and recommendations, which really is more of a conversation starter of some questions that we have for this group in the remaining time.
Maybe we should answer these. The people had questions here.
Okay, sure.
First.
So and this will be a good time that if you have questions, could you put them in the chat, and we'll see if we could address them. And then look at the questions that we have up. That would be more of questions for reflection and questions for conversation.
Whoops, sorry about that.
That's okay.
Yeah, I really, and people, if you don't want to write, you can just kind of talk, you know, at this point, if anybody wants that.
So I like the question because I'm engaged at the, you know, chair level. What is the role of the instructor in supporting students? I think that's really important for us to really kind of pay attention to students. And when students come or start to come to us with some of their concerns and issues, one of the things that we've done is we bring it back to our faculty meetings so that we can have an after meeting conversation about students that may be starting to show signs of slipping through. And then we try to, you know, engage their advisor and do a big wraparound as much as we can. It's harder when you have undergraduate, you know, programs that are 50 and 100 students large, but certainly at the graduate level, this has been very manageable and very helpful for us to get more of our students to that status of completer. And especially, as you mentioned, Lauri, during COVID, you know, we just had a lot of students that were in crisis. And so having those conversations and trying to fill in those gaps was really important for us as a unit. And it started at the individual instructor level. So I appreciate that question there.
Yeah, I think you're right. This role of the instructor is really important because, and personally, I'm not somebody who is, I mean, you know, we all have our pet peeves, but I think we have to look at attendance. I think we have to look at extra assignments. We have to look at contracts. We have to look at some other ways of, you know, how we get people through. It's not about passing. I mean, I do a lot of teacher ed folks, and this is only part of their journey.
Right.
And you don't want one course to stop them from graduating. I mean, this is a whole experience.
Right.
And, you know, there is this issue, you know, I think for when instructors are really rigid, but I don't even think they're rigid anymore. I think it's just more unknown. They don't know, and they're so busy, you know, kind of just dealing with everything.
Yeah, that's one of the
really
reasons you make a really good point. One of the reasons we wanted to bring it to faculty meetings so that we could have the conversations. Otherwise, like you said, you know, I don't even know if it's a matter of being rigid either, but we all get into our own space and we're just moving through, not really thinking, you know, that this could be a carryover in another class, that the same issues may be showing up, you know, in different spaces. But if you're not having those conversations, you don't know. So just bringing, you know, that individual instructor conversation to the table for more of us to share in it and see if there's a pattern that we can begin to address. Otherwise, you really just don't know. Like you said, that's so true.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges with this research has been the fact that everybody's situation is so individualized and highly contextualized, where you have different students at different parts of their life cycle. They have different disabilities that impact them in different ways. They have varied experiences with instructors. So they might have a very good response from one instructor, but a not so helpful bit of a response to accommodations from another instructor. Everyone's experience is so individualized that it's how do you determine a one-size-fits-all sort of intervention or approach to supporting students. But I think that the COVID-19 situation and some of the has played a role in kind of norming some of the academic supports across the wider population of realizing that things like for example, there were some accommodations or some examples of things that had been initiated during COVID that were actually helpful to some students with some disabilities, like having their lecture recorded so that they could go back and watch it by themselves on their own time schedule. That for them was helpful rather than having to get up at 7 o'clock in the morning and be in front of a live lecture, for example. So I think we might have a question. So I want to give a pause. Belinda, did you have a comment or a question that you'd like to talk about?
No, I was just fascinated by an expression. I always am. That a very wise school counselor once said to me that adults are just kids in bigger bodies. And so, you know, we have to remember that our undergrads and our grads are adults like us, but everybody, if we can, you know, I think it's helped us, as Karen said in EdMin, to think about how we work with students in the P12 system and how we truly have to live up to individualizing their learning plans. And we should be thinking about ways that we could do that developmentally appropriate for our adults.
Yeah, I mean, I think due dates are, I think we have to be, we can't be so rigid when it comes to due dates because life gets in the way. You know, they're not just students, they're parents, they're taking care of maybe their own parents, family. You know, I think we have to be really, you know, more, we have to let go here. Why, you know, so they don't get it in on time. They still have to get it in before, you know, before the end of the semester. So what can they do, you know?
Thanks, Lauri, and thanks, Gretchen, for this presentation. I'm really interested in how the discussion so far about the role of the instructor. And one thing that I've done that I'm wondering what the impact will be, if any, is deciding to, last semester I decided for all of my courses to just opt for the default intermittent flex plan. And that is something, so I did it last semester for the courses that I was going to do this semester. And I speak about that in the first week of classes so that students know that there are already accommodations for the class for anyone with disabilities. And so hoping that that will kind of disrupt the barrier to folks deciding to reach out to me or deciding to use their accommodations, or even those who are seeking services. And also, of course, there are so many course policies that we have that are important to overview when we meet students, but I make it a point to emphasize that accommodations, whether it be through disability services or just accessibility to something else, is something that keeps me accountable as well as them accountable. And so it's helpful for the both of us, not just for the use of the student. And I'm wondering if, as an instructor, that might be beneficial. I'm not sure, I just did it. But I think that's one more simplified way as we think about our course loads and a number of students that we see. And I have quite a bit of accommodations this semester to manage. If that's something that will allow us to still be engaged and effective in paying attention to the students while also keeping in mind all of the other priorities we simultaneously manage at the same time.
I'm sorry, Kristen, what do you do?
I am a first year assistant professor in higher ed and student.
No. What are you doing in your classes?
Oh, I have opted to do the intermittent flex plan. It's a default option that Student Disability Services offers. And so you can fill out this form and they will tag this default intermittent flex plan to your class. And so when students then submit for accommodations for your class, you know, we get the list of what they need, but they'll see that it's already a plan in place. And if there are additional things on top of that, then we modify. So for some of that, it's waives participation, extending deadlines, things of that nature. That's just a standard package, and you can modify as needed if students need beyond that.
Yeah, that's
great. That's great information. Yeah.
I know that we had at least one student, maybe more, who there were some students who came into Ohio State already having been diagnosed with disability, but there were some students who actually sought out accommodations and sought out disability services as a result of advice from an instructor. And I believe that there was one student who actually had a recommendation from an ed studies professor or team of folks teaching their class, saying, hey, why don't you go over to Student Life Disability Services and get support? So this person didn't even know that they had a disability identity until they engaged with a faculty member. So I think that role of instructor is key, incredibly vital.
It really is. I agree.
And I think keeping in mind that instructors aren't only faculty, right? So we need to be having this broader conversation with staff and lecturers as well, because we aren't the only ones interfacing with our students.
No, that's a good point. That's a good point. I always do a student information form at the beginning of classes just to learn about the students. And I do ask about disabilities, if there's anything I need to do. I mean, I always implement some kind of, inclusive practices in the class, but that's not what I was hearing in the study. It's more about attendance, due dates, taking untimed tests, getting help with note-taking, things like that.
Thank you. Are there any concluding comments or remarks you'd like to make, Gretchen and Lauri? Because we are at the 59 minutes, so we need to keep moving forward to end on time promptly. Is there anything else?
No, just thanks everyone for your time and attention and for doing this with us.
I agree. Thank you so very much for having us and joining us. This has been rich. We really very, very much appreciate it. And to those of you remaining on the call, we invite you to join us on February the 1st, where we will kick off what would be our Black Excellence or Black History Month. We'll have a special speaker, Hassan Kwame Jeffries, is going to be joining us from the Department of History. He's the Associate Professor of the Department of History, and he's going to talk about what we should be teaching about race and democracy, lessons from last year. So I look forward to seeing you all again. Thank you again for your time. Big cheers for Lauri and Gretchen. Thank you so much for this work. It's so valuable. And I will happily send a note to the dean, letting him know his GSIRI dollars went for a really good cause. So thanks again for everybody joining us, and we'll see you again next month. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.